practices and provide you with some in-class examples on teaching the physiology of the heart. I'll give an overview of the problem, present some science, and provide some classroom solutions that I've used over the years, and then give a note about my teaching process. Well, here's the problem. We know a lot about the cardiac cycle and the ECG, and we present students with a lot of detailed information fairly quickly. This stuff may be familiar to you, but to many students, things like the Wigger's diagram look more like this. There are a number of overlapping curves with a bunch of sequential events, and I'm going to have to line those up correctly in order to do well on an exam. And this can be anxiety-provoking, and it can present barriers to learning. Here we see in 2002, researchers bring a set of diagnostic questions regarding cardiovascular phenomena to a diversity of class types, 200, 300, and 400 level physiology courses, at a diversity of institution types, with a variety of class sizes, and found that the majority of students get the majority of questions wrong across all institutions. So there are clear barriers to learning here. Seeking solutions, we see Cardoza in 2016 integrates a puzzle game in learning the cardiac cycle, and we see significant reductions in number of mistakes made and improvements in scores during class exercises, as well as some improvements in overall test scores. A study that same year on ECG interpretation shows that the inclusion of peer learning demonstrates some improvement in entry exam, exit exam, and retention performance. So active learning, peer learning, different modalities seem to have an effect. A follow-on study from Cardoza, we don't have a lot of time for the details, focus on the solid columns. On the right-hand side, we see an active learning module. On the left-hand side, we see a traditional teaching method, and the solid columns represent an exit exam. This is self-assessment of anxiety just prior to the exit exam, and we see significant reductions in self-assessed anxiety. When we look at salivary indicators of stress, cortisol and alpha amylase, we see radical reductions in pre-test anxiety for the exit exam for students that were provided with active learning when studying the cardiac cycle and ECG. So active learning, peer-to-peer learning, these are all, these multimodal learning methods, these all offer some potential for improving student retention, student performance. So I've been using active learning and teaching cardiophysiology for some time for those reasons, and I'm going to present you with a handful of examples, starting with the use of this heart rate monitor. So I take this heart rate monitor, I either hold it myself, or a student volunteer or peer facilitator holds these paddles, and I use either on screen or in this case on my iPhone through a dock camera. We project the heart rate graphically and numerically, and we ask this question: what are the paddles actually measuring in order to estimate heart rate? There you go. Now you're up. Jump on pole everywhere and tell me what you see. What you think is actually being measured when it comes to this heart rate monitor. And notice Sonia has these paddles in her hand that she'll be using, and it's going to be detecting her heart rate. Spatial awareness requires much spatial awareness to get that done. So here it's measuring her heart rate, and it's giving it to you graphically and visually, and it's giving it to you in a tabular form as well. And it's giving, she's standing here at the front of the class and, maybe a little nervous, and also standing, a heart rate of 70. Maybe that's normal, maybe that's not normal, right? For the individual. Somewhere in that range makes sense, doesn't it? Beats per minute. So what's it measuring? And here we have the Poll Everywhere word map from that same session, and we can see lots of students referring to things like vowels or flow or blood pressure when it comes to the paddles estimating heart rate. So not quite making that connection to the ECG yet. And our next step is to offer them a linear review of that physiology about 3 to 4 times a quarter. I have a guest lecturer come in so the students have a chance to listen to someone else. They listen to me quite a bit all quarter, so here's a guest lecturer introducing them to the linear physiology of the cardiac cycle and the ECG.
but now there's this big electrical piece. Like how does my heart know when to beat? How does my heart know when to close the valves and get the blood into the ventricle from the atrium? So I just wanted to go through that with you guys. So try to follow along with the picture too. I think it helps understand this a little bit better. So first, the first signal that we're going to get is from the sinoatrial node. So this is located up in the...
So now that they've got a review of that linear physiology, we meet with the next group of students that's going to support our in-class activities, and we teach them the cardio pantomime. Each student is assigned a role with a feature of the heart, and we arrange them spatially in the shape of the heart, and we teach them the pantomime signals. If you're going to transmit an electrical signal, you clap. If you're a chamber of the heart contracting, you squeeze. If you're a valve, you raise your arms up into the air in a Y when you're open and put your hands down by your side when the valve is closed. And we practice it a bit and get those students comfortable. And then we head back the next day to the classroom and we demonstrate.
Have to work in synchronization. So let's give them a 2 1,000 count here and give them a second, and if you have to restart the heart, it will take a second to get synchronized here. Let's look at what's happening. Perfect. And can we get now, let's get our...
And what you're hearing there are students pantomiming normal cardiac function. And we go on to demonstrate tachycardia, bradycardia, and an AV block using the same techniques. And what you hear right at the end is comfortable laughter. Students in the field are using this matrix to organize their thinking, and they're thinking to themselves less about the assessment and more about, hey, this is fun, and I can go down in the pit and I can clap, I can do this stuff, and I can use these techniques to practice. And we follow this up with a more detailed lecture on the nodes and intervals on the ECG before we transition to the peer-to-peer exercise.
We can start to think about the intervals as being somewhat important because the intervals are reflective of the stuff we were doing up here when we're showing the cardiac cycle. And we're looking for interpretation of the ECG in this class. Right? I'm not looking for you to guess whether it is an AV block 1 or AV block 2. That is A, a detailed question, and B, I think somewhat trivial compared to understanding what is the heart doing in the various cases that we're looking at, okay? So if you're fibrillating, you know, the atrial, so this is atrial fibrillation, and if you look at the heights of the T wave and the P wave, they're very similar relatively, and so is the overpolarization there. So if you're fibrillating and going back and forth, you're gonna mask those other waves, as Connor just suggested. So fantastic. Okay, good. So that's a start. Yeah?
This is like a serious question. On the top one, like, how is he alive?
Hear that question. It was, this is a serious question. On the top one, how is he still alive? And the student was referring to the ECG on ventricular fibrillation. And that's a potentially embarrassing question to ask. And I think that the students feel comfortable asking those kinds of questions in front of 100 of their peers because we've developed a classroom environment that's inclusive and that's conversational and that is inquiry-based. Of course, we follow up with these activities using an in-class quiz well prior to the exam. We reinforce this during discussion sections, and the teaching team uses these tools of the matrix and the cardiac cycle, pantomime, and these active approaches in their reinforcement in our study sessions as well. Brief note about how I prep using continuous improvement. I start with the self-assessment and SWOT analysis using my existing materials, and then I pretty much immediately go to the literature. I'm an evidence-based instructor. I like to rely upon the science wherever possible. After completing my literature review, making sure my literature is up to date, then I turn to my peers and start having conversations about what's working in the classroom. After that, I conduct my formal lesson planning. Here's where all my other pedagogical tools come into play. Then it's time to teach, and I follow up with a SWOT to make sure that I've got notes about where I have completed improvements, as well as where there are still opportunities and threats that will need to be addressed subsequently. Thanks for taking a minute to get to know my teaching practice a little bit, and I hope to see you in the interview.